Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. Today I am joined here by Ethan, aka Film Junkie, whose link will be found down in the title below. Check out his channel, but we are covering the 10 most important horror films of all time. And I think the distinction is that we wanted it to be purposely vague so that we could dip into a lot of different movies for a lot of different reasons. So this is going to include our favorite horror movies, but also ones that we think helped lay the groundwork for films in the horror genre to come. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, the first film that I want to talk about is The Exorcist, 1973, directed by William Friedkin. And this is super important for a number of reasons, but I want to kind of start off by saying, for a long time, I had The Shining considered to be the best horror movie of all time, as far as I was concerned. And I felt this way for probably about a year and a half, maybe closer to just a year. But anywho, after kind of reflecting on this through editing my Exorcist video and kind of listening to the discussion I had with my dad about it, which led me to think more and more about the film, it made me lean towards kind of favoring The Exorcist as what I think the best horror movie of all time is. And I also think it's the most important horror film of all time. A lot of the reason for this is horror movies are kind of, they get a bad rap for the general horror movie, in that there isn't tremendous acting all the time. And I don't think that could be further from the truth than in The Exorcist. And I think Ellen Burstyn plays the role of the mother damn near perfectly. Her outbursts, you can feel that. And Father Karras is a protagonist that I was 150% completely and totally behind this guy, and was really pulling for him big time. On top of that, you have perhaps one of the best voice acting performances from Mercedes McCambridge, who just completely lays it all out on the line for her voicing of the demon Pazuzu. And on top of that, I think Linda Blair, I mean, despite her career really only existing between the Exorcist series, or really this being her career highlight, I guess, she was really believable as the child. She played like a very innocent child quite well, and then was equally as believable as this kind of demonic human being.
Your mother's in here with his cars. Would you like to leave a message? I see that she gets it.
And something that plays a huge role in that is the special effects and makeup in The Exorcist. I think they did the makeup of Regan as this possessed person just perfectly, and it doesn't feel dated whatsoever. For 1973, this is one of the best examples of special effects. And this movie, it also has some really, really iconic shots. There's going to be a lot more iconic shots that we're going to talk about, but you know, the priest, Max van Sydow, outside of the house with that light just coming through the window towards him is a great shot. And another one that really stands out for me is when Regan is possessed and the statue kind of shows up behind her and she reaches towards the sky. It's just beautiful, iconic imagery in this, horrifying movie. What seals the deal for this movie, not only did it kind of birth a subgenre of horror movies in the Exorcist subgenre, it does so by playing with themes that really matter to us. That is, like, the perversion of innocence done via a super archaic theme structure of good versus evil.
There you have good guys versus bad guys.
Something that everyone can be familiar with. And then the other one that works spectacularly well in this movie is science versus religion. And that's played out primarily through Father Karras. And I think even Ellen Burstyn, the mother, plays a big part in that too, because she, like most Americans at that time, and especially now, favor science heavily as opposed to religion, especially when it comes to a seemingly medical concern. And Karras is someone who maybe had the faith at one point. Obviously, he's in the priesthood. Could have been wealthy and successful as a psychiatrist, but there's an underlying pulling there that keeps him in the priesthood, even when it actually means that his family members will suffer for it. And it's really unique how he struggles with his faith, and it seems like the actual facing evil that confirms his faith, which is something that's actually brought up in Exorcist 3 as well. But this is just so well done to see, youth tarnished by a demonic force, something that we look at as the ultimate evil, is awesome. And then to see a realistic approach to, faith in a real world kind of dilemma is just amazing. And it feels like the perfect horror movie for all of those reasons, and highly inspirational. Like, it transcends a horror movie. It's one of the best movies of all time. And it felt like you could see something that was transcendent in the horror genre because of The Exorcist. So it birthed a subgenre, but it also completely upped the game of what you could expect from a horror movie.
I absolutely adore The Exorcist. I also think it's one of the best horror movies ever made. I definitely have that where over time my appreciation for the film grew and grew. And then one day I was like, yeah, this is a masterpiece of horror. Just so expertly crafted in terms of like subtly done horror, and just like making a very like spiritual film as realistic as possible. The beautiful connection that William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty had to like create this. It's like a lightning caught in a jar. It's a brilliant film. The highlight of the performances, in my opinion, and a lot of it can be attributed to Dick Smith's special effects and makeup work, but Linda Blair, I mean, man, that girl's terrifying. It just in my opinion, it's up there with Jack Nicholson for the greatest horror performance of all time. It's just iconic horror imagery. Yeah, it hits on all of those in the most subtle and introspective ways, and again that beautiful marriage between Friedkin and Peter Blatty, Friedkin and Blatty, just combining their forces to make this one very surrealistic film that and I think the whole science versus faith ideas, I think are sold really well with Ellen Burstyn's character. Like, she's so well written in this movie because she's just so completely at a loss at what to do. And she tries to go through every single avenue to figure out what is wrong with her daughter. Them doing the scans of her brain, still, just thinking about it gives me chills. Yeah, but also having, from an outsider's perspective, one of your very, very, very close human being, like the human being that is probably closest to you in this world, has an illness, a quote unquote illness, and just like running all these like almost alienated, like alien in and of itself tests to see like what is wrong is just so it's worrying and it's chilling and it's what horror is all about. All right. I wanted to say, also recommend Exorcist 3. Very, very underrated film. So for my list, I thought I would go in chronological order. And I picked movies that have had a lot of time to become iconic and influential. I didn't want to pick new movies, even though there are some new movies that I would consider highly influential. For example, Robert Eggers' The Witch. That is a highly influential film in my mind. Also, Ari Aster's Hereditary. That's also a highly influential film. But for this, my newest film was from 1982. So, I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyways, I'm going to go by chronological order, and I'm starting with a movie that you might not think is a horror movie, but when you think about some of the stuff it did, and some of the images it creates, you could definitely see. So Metropolis, for those of you who haven't seen it, is about basically a utopian city where the higher-ups are controlling all of the... There's two different classes of people. There's the higher-ups and there's the workers. And the higher-ups control all the workers. And one of the son of one of the factory owners basically discovers all this is happening and like how mistreated these workers are. And he becomes intent on helping them. He befriends one of the workers who also is planning a rebellion, and his father gets his scientist like henchman to create basically a robot replica of this woman to deceive his son. And basically, it's about the connection between the head and the hands of this world. And so it pioneered... The reason why I put it on this list is because, one, it's highly influential just from a filmmaking standpoint. Just the sheer amount of what Fritz Lang did as far as building a grand-scale epic, as far as creating a science fiction story that laid the groundwork for so many to follow. But also just the sheer amount that he did for horror alone. So many horror elements are in this this movie. Like I see even some Frankenstein in this, and it inspired some of the early horror movies, and a lot of ideas could be attributed to it. And it's also influential because it was such a harrowing film to make for its time, because it flopped horribly when it came out. And it was, I believe it was during, like, right in the middle of, like, Germany's downfall from World War One. So I think, I don't know, like, too much about it, but so basically, yeah, he did. I don't think he had. It took a lot to make. It costed a lot, and it took a lot of time, and it didn't make much back. And the full restored version is said to be lost, I think. But like and like in somehow the restoration has gone backwards in certain cases, and it's just a beautifully told story, and it is almost my favorite silent film. I still love Passion of Joan of Arc more, but as far as like there was nothing quite like Metropolis at the time. He like, as far as like expressionist horror is kind of used as the groundwork for period horror for Eggers. And I do want to quickly mention, because I don't think either was put it on the list, so we should probably mention it. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a very big horror influencer. Sometimes regarded as the first horror film, because of the gothic scenery, the German expressionist artwork, the very twisted, wicked performances on display. Really laid the groundwork for horror as well. So
the next film I'd like to talk about is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1973, by Tobe Hooper. This is a film that it kind of picks up where Psycho left off in a little bit of ways. This movie is actually kind of like, it bridges the gap in a couple of ways, for me at least. It bridges the gap from Psycho, where you get the look inside of a madman, which Psycho did really, really well. But this feels like, you know, if you're kind of taking a glimpse at insanity with Psycho, and, you know, to kind of take the metaphor full all the way, is like, this is an unblinking stare into the abyss, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It feels like just completely off the wall, insane. This character, who is based off of Ed Gein, and I don't think it is quite crazy that Ed Gein inspired maybe two of the most important horror films of all time, but his story is so just out there, strange, and hard to believe that it, you know, only something like that could spur movies as unique as those two. But to get a grisly look inside of this mind, it felt like it kind of modernized that movie for an audience that was now used to seeing war footage on television, as Vietnam is waging when this came out. So it felt like, you know, the type of reboot that actually means something. You know, Psycho, you can say like, hey, it's a timeless classic, but this felt more contemporary. And it almost feels, you know, it breathes in air, like some fresh air into a story like that. And the other way that I think it bridges the gap is that it feels like it evolves the monster in movies. So you have the Universal monsters, which is primarily kind of you're following the antagonist character for the most part. And it might come down to a final showdown, obviously. And Frankenstein and Dracula take it for what it is, but they're a little bit dated. And whether that's just because they got their day in the sunlight such a long time ago, but it was kind of time for something new to be at the forefront. And I think Leatherface was what helped spurred the movement that brought upon a Michael Myers and brought upon a Jason Voorhees. And I think it made people think, you know what, I can kind of come up with an idea that doesn't have to be from a novel that everyone's familiar with and create something just as iconic. And obviously that turned out to be true.
I feel like what definitely helped bridge that gap was the reinvention of the Universal monsters with the Hammer horror films. Because I think the latest was in the early 70s. So I feel like that also played a big role in sort of setting that for the modern sort of modern character acting in horror movies. There's actually not. I think one thing that people notice is that despite the fact that there is some really grotesque stuff in it, there's not a lot of bloody scenes in the movie. It's it doesn't show a lot, but the stuff that it implies, the big thing is that it implies it, and just the way it uses the implied horror is so grotesque and so much worse as far as crafting a horror experience. Worse, I mean scarier. Leatherface is but it's not just the Leatherface show. It's it's the whole Sawyer family. It's the dad. Not, I guess I wouldn't call it dad. They're brothers. I think all three of them are brothers. There's the old guy who evil and rotten, and then there's the younger brother. His name is Nubbin Sawyer, who is just a crazy person and just doesn't. It seems like none of it is all there. He's mentally just incapable of actually and he's just capable of. And then there's their grandpa, who was actually played by a 19-year-old actor in makeup, who's supposed to be 100 years old, and that the horrifying scene in which the final girl is at the dinner table, just horrified at what she's, and just the grandpa's there, and he's licking the girl's fingers. It's just so, yeah, it's so good. The villain, so defining how awful, not defined, but just how awful they are. Just the fact that they pick up this random guy in the middle of nowhere, and he's just kind of weird, and he just goes from weird to psych. All right, so my next movie, this one is one that to be completely honest, is the most important horror movie in my opinion. I think both of us brought it up, and I think we would be crucified if we didn't bring it up. And it is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 masterpiece, Psycho. So I don't know what there is to say about Psycho that hasn't been said already. It is a well, I guess I could talk about just like how many rules it broke and why it is pretty much the most influential horror movie. So even the marketing was, and a lot of that could be attributed to another movie that came out called Peeping Tom by Michael Powell, and which broke a lot of rules and kind of it walked so Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho could run, but Hitchcock just broke so many rules. Movie like not established but established rules, and just the marketing behind it, the fact that he showed nothing to the audience before they came in to watch, the fact that they wouldn't be allowed in to watch the movie if they came in late.
It's brilliant in its writing, and like Ethan said, it takes a formula that's in place and completely breaks the rules of what you are supposed to do in a movie like this. And for someone who's so keen on keeping suspense, that by doing that, by breaking the formula, it makes the audience think, well, what the hell is going to happen next? The main character dies, like, at the halfway point. What are we going to do next? On top of that, obviously, the shower scene is just iconic imagery. It also, you cannot understate the fact that this is highly inspirational to the slasher genre and is arguably the prototypical slasher that was first introduced to American audiences. The character of Norman Bates is really important for cinema and horror especially, because you sympathize with him at first, but he's also a glimpse into insanity. And you didn't see that very frequently. Obviously, a movie that I think Ethan mentions is Peeping Tom, which also kind of gives you an unblinking look into the mind of a serial killer. And Norman Bates does that as well. Very well, of a split personality that is, based upon Ed Gein, as Ethan says. On top of that, I mean, his reveal is a part of a rug pull that is just completely unheard of, which, obviously breaks the formula. But also feels like this huge momentous reveal that probably had weight unlike anything else audiences were used to at that time. What makes this film so iconic in the horror pantheon is getting the look inside of what is truly horrifying.
Straight up killed her off, which I feel like most movies now don't even have the guts to do that. Like, just to kill off the main protagonist, like, halfway through. It definitely invented so much that would become staples in slasher films. Like, obviously, like we said, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely like one of the closest to a slasher that we could get before we got a film that I'm sure we're going to talk about later. But Psycho did so much for just the human killer in a movie, and the psychology and the way that Hitchcock explores the psychology of that killer is just so deeply interesting. Yeah, he's yet another killer inspired by Ed Gein. Uh, uh, the idea of wanting to become a woman. Not well, he didn't want to become a woman. He wanted to. He obviously wanted to dress up like his mother because his mother was a rotting corpse, and he basically split personality. Um, we did get Beau is Afraid this year, and that is considered the Citizen Kane of mommy issue movies. I don't know. I don't know why people would say that. It's just one article I read, but um, I realized that Psycho is the ultimate mommy issue movie. Well, the shower scene is it did so much in multiple different areas as far as doing wonders for the movie industry as a whole. Like the shocking nature of it, the violence of it, the visceral nature of the death, the music by Bernard Herrmann is so important to that. The quick cuts, the uh, man, and then just the rug pull, just everything you thought this movie was going to be is not what it is at all. I do want to say something about the rug pull, and it's that like I feel like with any other movie, if you were to try to do that, it would take a lot for that kind of rug pull to work, just for everything you knew about this movie to come up from behind. But Hitchcock somehow, if you take a step back and look narratively, Hitchcock makes it work. Like he really hints at this whole thing going awry in just the most subtle ways possible, and just the way he made it work narratively just worked so well for the film. For you viewers who are watching this video, if you haven't seen Psycho, what the hell are you doing? Go see Psycho, and go see other Alfred Hitchcock movies. That guy has made way too many good movies for people to just avoid his films. Rear Window, Vertigo, Rope, North by Northwest, The Birds. The man's done so much. So
the next film I'd like to discuss is Halloween. This film is really important because it kind of picks up where Leatherface left off. Obviously, Leatherface kind of busted the door open for these type of slasher-esque, slasher-inspired, iconic villains to, just explode on the landscape. And Michael Myers feels like the best example of how that was done after Leatherface. And it almost feels like it kind of perfected the formula, too, a little bit. And obviously, a lot of praise has to be given to Hooper. But I don't think he was able to take what he did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and follow it up properly with 2. And obviously, Halloween as a series doesn't do much justice as well, but Michael Myers feels like the pinnacle of what that silent, stoic hero can be, and that is an embodiment of evil, like a force of nature, something that can't be killed. It exists always, and so long as you're alive to run away from him / it will be there to follow you, which is truly horrifying. And in a way, it represents the evil of humankind. On top of that, which obviously all of that I really admire, and I think makes Michael Myers an interesting character slash villain. I think Lindsay Strode or aka Jamie Lee Curtis is really well done and is kind of like the prototypical final girl, which is also super, super important to horror movies, basically from this time onwards.
I think John Carpenter, and I think John Carpenter, if we're talking like modern day horror, John Carpenter is the greatest horror director. I mean, we got 2 of his that we're going to talk about. So, it's suffice. He is an extremely skilled director when it comes to building suspense in his movies. And when I first watched Halloween, I was so shocked by how well directed and well executed its simple premise was, because I was not buying the whole slasher thing. I was like, the Friday the 13th movies, the next movies, those are lame, those are dumb. Me not seeing a single one of those movies. But Halloween for the first time, and I was just taken aback by just how well done it was. And then I watched it last year for Halloween, and again I was taken aback. This movie, for how simple, how small the budget it is, it just did everything that it needed to do super well. Definitely recommend Halloween Ends, the best sequel. I'm just kidding. I mean, Halloween has one of the lamest franchises, from what I've heard. I've seen only the 3 reboots. The 3 reboots, I should say. David Gordon Green's reboots. And, but from what I've heard, other than that, 2 and 3, the original 2 and 3, the Halloween franchise is lame as crap. I know a couple of things. After Halloween becomes the most profitable movie ever made, which is not a joke, the studio was like, well, we gotta make another one. And John Carpenter's like, I don't want to make another one. And the studio's like, you gotta make another one. And he's like, all right. So he only wrote the script for Halloween 2, and he just was completely wasted, and he basically just pulled a bunch of stuff out of his ass to make the script for Halloween 2. And all of a sudden, Michael Myers and Laurie Strode are related. And then for Rob Zombie, John Carpenter has been very vocal about how he hates Rob Zombie's vision of Halloween a lot, which I don't blame him. It's probably turned into like a gore fest, which Halloween was. It's not really a gore fest movie. Similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was a lot more subtle and quaint than that. But then David Gordon Green comes out with his 2018 Halloween movie, and Carpenter did the score for it. And he seems to be just like appreciative of the limelight, I guess, without having to direct. That Halloween 3, I think, has garnered such a cult following because it's such a departure from the Halloween series. Even though like 4, 5, 6, H2O, Resurrection, those are all just the same thing. I just know that Resurrection has the trick or treat mother effer line. I don't remember. I obviously haven't seen those movies at all, and I don't really plan to. I do want to mention one quick film that I don't think either of us put on our list, and I feel like an absolute idiot for not putting it on my list, but Alien. Just brilliant science fiction film, definitely influential, highly, highly, highly influential. Just wanted to mention that. But for my next film, is one that is just highly inspirational to me personally, not only, but also a film that did a whole lot for a different kind of genre of horror, subgenre of horror. It's definitely one that I would say is not. It's not the best for someone to. It's not for picking your first David Lynch movie to watch. That is not the one to pick because it is one of his most surrealist, nightmarish films to this day. Like up there with Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire. So I would recommend something like Blue Velvet or like Wild at Heart for a first. But yeah, Eraserhead is a prime example of what happens when you don't give up on your vision. Yes, creative. That is the key word. Creative. Like, and just going back to how he went about making this film, it took him 5 years. He had only $10,000 to the film. He constantly was running out of funding. He was staying at like a stable in the stables of a Beverly Hills mansion. But Lynch was such a crafty guy that he was able to make it work, and work extremely well. And I think one of the biggest points of creativity, and I think what makes it influential from a filmmaking standpoint, is the sound design by Lynch and his assistant Alan Splett, who has since passed away, unfortunately. Yes, rest in peace for just bringing us into this fascinatingly bizarre world filled with such, like, it's just the spacey synth, the use of jazz musician Fats Waller's organ tracks, like just like the carefully crafted way he went about setting the tone for this world with the sound and the lighting and the set design is just creative, and that's what I appreciate most in film is creativity, and this just explodes with creativity about the disconnection that a parent has with their child. Like, none of us know what this thing is. Like, it's just, it looks so real. It somehow looks so real, but it just looks so, the shape of it is strange. Just the way it moves is just strange. It's just such a you feel sorry for it, but at the same time, it's horrifying to look at. Yeah, and it leads to a scene that, to this day, still gives me, like, the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it, which is the very end, where the bandages that it's wrapped in, Henry decides to open them up and discovers something truly horrifying. And the key word is telling a story. Like, there are many people who accuse him of like, just creating a bunch of images that are weird and bizarre and not having any connection to, like, an actual story. But if you pay attention enough, there is a clear story. You just need to, like, think about it. And there is a clear story, and it may not seem clear in the moment, but if you pay attention, it will be clear. And that's what he gets accused of, is like, oh, no, this is so weird for the sake of weird, but there's just more method to that. Like YMS, oh my gosh. Talk about hypocrisy. I need to discuss this. Like, that is such a hypocritical stance when Mr. YMS is like, oh, The Holy Mountain and Synecdoche, New York are the best movies ever. This is like, just get out of here with that. Get out of here. Like, that's just so hypocritical. I love the Holy Mountain, but that's just ridiculous logic. He was like, David Lynch is the most pretentious filmmaker. About a lot of the stuff that he says is just so pretentious, which is mind-boggling coming from him. Like, I would consider him the most pretentious movie critic. I really like his reviews, to be honest, but I just think his takes on David Lynch are absolutely ridiculous. Like, Wild at Heart, I think he didn't like very much, and then Mulholland Drive, I think he might have liked it. He liked Eraserhead, I think, but he just was reluctant to. He was reluctant. I think he gave it like a reluctant 7 out of 10, which is to say, very, very good, but not something he loves, which is fine, obviously. Like, that's completely acceptable. And even if he didn't like it, I'd still be like, okay. Just the sheer amount of hypocrisy that comes with David Lynch's pretentious is ridiculous. I will say, with Eraserhead, it also inspired a lot of body horror, like modern body horror films. I wouldn't be surprised if it inspired like David Cronenberg, any of his movies. I could even see like Possession. Yeah, the degradation of humanity. It's one of my favorite movies. Watch it, please.
The next film I'd like to talk about is a F.W. Murnau film from 1922 titled Nosferatu. This film is, I think, the inspiration for the Universal Monster movies. It kind of shows that a titular villain with iconic makeup, striking makeup, can be the kind of lead of a film, even though it's the antagonist. And it also has the same distinction of what Metropolis does, in that it shows that modern audiences not only take to the German expressionist style, but shows how this dark gothic look can be utilized in a horror movie very, very well. And it has iconic shots that stick with audiences to this day, such as Nosferatu in the hallway.
If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights? Nosferatu!
And Nosferatu going up the steps. On top of that, I think, it's obviously great for special effects.
Nosferatu is another just shoo-in for this. It's such an important film in terms of the birth of iconic horror movie characters. Like, when it comes to like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Caesar is definitely like one of the most important horror characters ever, but Nosferatu is like one of the most iconic. Like, even disassociating it from Dracula, he is Count Orlok, I should say. Count Orlok is just so... Max Schreck is just so iconic looking in that film, and he's so eerie looking. Just his stare, his weird shaped face, just everything about him is so freaky. But my next is the 1980 Stanley Kubrick film, The Shining. It is maybe still my favorite horror movie, because my final film on the list is in contention with The Shining at the moment. I don't know which one I love more, but The Shining is like Stanley Kubrick in his wheelhouse, and it is a genius level film. It's influential because it's Stanley Kubrick, And that man has always been influential with every film that he makes. So it's no surprise that when he does horror, it's one of the most influential horror movies ever made. Yeah, like it blurs the line between psychological and paranormal, which is a major criticism. That and the ending is a major criticism towards this film who love the book. And it's like, that's another one of those infamous points of contention with this movie is how much Kubrick changed for the book. And I've actually read the book of The Shining. And let me tell you right now, those book readers are wrong as hell. I do really, really like The Shining book, but the ending was stupid. The ending was really corny and cheesy, and it was a lot less subtle than Kubrick's film, which is what I loved so much about Stanley Kubrick's movie, is that it was subtle with what it wanted to portray, and it just left me much more terrified than King's original novel. In the novel, Dick Hallorann comes back. I mean, in both movies, Dick Hallorann comes back and goes to save the day. In the book version, he survives. He's pretty much the ultimate savior for Danny and Wendy. But a possessed Jack, Jack who's possessed of the ghosts of this hotel, he breaks free of that possession, tells Danny he loves him, and then kind of kills himself. And the hotel kind of explodes. And there's this really, really stupid moment where they just fly through the air. And you just think of like, I think of Nicolas Cage in the explosion of Alcatraz and The Rock. I just think of that. And it's so dumb. Obviously, in the movie, Dick Hallorann does not survive. He's instantly killed when he enters the hotel. But that does wonders but what that does super well is that creates like it creates like this horrifying feeling of, oh my god, this man is truly gone off the rails. And like Jack chasing Danny around the maze is terrifying. And but Wendy and Danny ultimately escape because Danny ultimately thinks of a very smart plan, and they survive. And Jack gets lost in the maze, and he just freezes to death. And that's the end of the movie. And then it cuts to this, after this long and very introspective film of like some of the most eerie imagery in all of horror. We get this picture that just leaves us on edge, and it's so creepy. I love King, but Kubrick did exactly what he should have done. It's more overt and more over the top than, like, it's a lot more over the top supernatural. People love it. People love that book. I like it a lot. I would say it's definitely not one of King's best. If I had to recommend 3 Stephen King books, it would be The Stand, 11/22/63, and Pet Sematary. Those are the 3.
The final movie that I want to add to, I guess, the actual list itself is A Nightmare on Elm Street, which it gave birth to one of the most iconic movie villains of all time, which was vastly different from the likes of Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and even Leatherface, in that he was unmasked, so you got to see his facial expressions, and also very talkative. He harkens back to Pazuzu in a way, and what Pazuzu would say through Reagan at many scenes, these kind of disturbing little pieces to taunt the protagonists. But the most important is like the birth of the idea that you're not safe anywhere. So to have a villain that faces you or kind of haunts you in your dreams is super, super unique and creative, and also is spectacularly done. Like, once an idea like that is done, it kind of, you can't really do it without it feeling like a clear ripoff. But this film did it, and I think hit it out of the park on its first try. So, you know, it creates these iconic lines, has iconic imagery at the same time, so it kind of hits the same boxes that you get from a Leatherface while adding a few as well. But it also introduces a theme of, like, children paying for the sons of, or children paying for the sins of their father, which is, you know, really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed that aspect from this film as well.
Yeah, well, Nightmare on Elm Street was basically the Wes Craven's answer to, like, all the overload of generic slasher movies we got in the early 80s. But he reinvented it with a more creative, literally nightmarish, surrealist quality with Nightmare on Elm Street, and I think in doing so, crafted a much better first movie than Friday the 13th, and a much better series than either Friday the 13th or Halloween. And definitely one of the most important aspects in creating that character was choosing the right person to play the role. With Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, get a stuntman, put him in a mask, you're good. But with Nightmare on Elm Street, they chose the legendary Robert Englund, and he has not been replaced all from the original Friday the 13th all the way up to Freddy vs. Jason in 2003. And the only time he was not Freddy was the 2010 remake, and is widely regarded as the worst Nightmare on Elm Street movie to date. All right, my final film that I have on my list for most influential horror movies is by a director who we already discussed one film from, and it is in contention for my favorite horror film with The Shining, and that is John Carpenter's 1982 remake of The Thing. I saw it in the theater for its 40th anniversary, and unfortunately the sound was off. So unfortunately, like, some of the sound effects were like pitched up, like the volume was way too high, and then the dialogue was way too quiet, which sucked. But the visuals were unbelievable on a big screen. Like, somehow they're even better blown up. Like, you'd think you'd notice, like, all the imperfections, and you do, but, like, the shadows and the freaky imagery is just somehow even better in a big screen. Rob Bottin did this at 22. I honestly don't know what he did after this. He did The Fog and he did The Thing, and I don't know what else he did. He's since kind of disappeared from films altogether. But his special effects for this film are, when people say what are the best when it comes to practical effects, what are the best movies that come to mind, and I think people will say two things, either Jurassic Park or The Thing. Even though the Jurassic Park is known for its CG, but it's also known for its amazing practical effects. But The Thing, I think, would come up first. The paranoia and the isolation that this creates, which leads to my favorite scene in horror history, with the blood test scene. in which it's just this slow, methodical process of like these very tired men who feels like they can't trust a single person, and just the slow, methodical process of trying to figure out who the thing is. It's just, I already know what the answer is, and the tension is still rising from it. I have seen the original The Thing from Another World. When I first watched it, I was like, yo, this is great. And then I watched the John Carpenter one, and I said, whoa, this is great as well. And I have since loved the John Carpenter one more and more, and I have since liked the Howard Hawks Thing from Another World less and less. And I think I saw it because Cinemassacre did like a video on why the original Thing is underrated, and why the 1980s Thing is not as good as people say it is, like not as good as the original 1950s The Thing. He's wrong. Because the tension in John Carpenter's film is far better executed, because it builds on paranoia and fear so much better. And like I get that palpable sense of tension to the whole idea of it. And the very understated score by it's kind of by Ennio Morricone, who is my favorite composer of all time. But he just did a whole score for The Thing and told John Carpenter, do whatever you'd like with it. And so there's just these subtle orchestral undertones to the whole thing, and it's so wonderful. But I think John Carpenter did the main theme, which is up there with Halloween for being iconic. It's up there for one of the best horror themes ever.
You know, I think The Thing is super, super important to horror history in that it has two major aspects in which it does very, very well. Obviously, it shows what distrust and isolation can do to people. Not trusting your fellow man, or the people you work with, the people you know, is just done almost, I could say, probably perfectly in this film. And then obviously the body horror on display is just brilliantly done, and it makes you terrified to be infected by whatever the thing is.
The ending is just brilliant in every way.
The next film I'd like to talk about is Funny Games, directed by Michelle Haneke. What I really enjoyed about this film is not only its fourth wall breakingness, but also its ability to criticize American audiences, which was kind of deemed infatuated with violence at this time period, and I think it's applicable nowadays if you were to ask Michelle Haneke, as well as exposing some of the tropes and stereotypes of villains and what you would come to expect in a horror movie, to get its point across. All the while, it's actually playing out a horror plot line really, really well through the direction of Michelle Haneke, and also introduce fourth wall breaking, which is, it's all really unique and cool to see done. And I don't think it's fully taken hold of like us seeing people taking inspiration from this, but I do think there will be directors who are inspired by this style maybe in the future or are already inspired by it, but haven't really let it shine all the way through yet.
And I think to that note, I do want to mention one that's pretty famous from the 90s. It is another Wes Craven movie, Scream. Scream is definitely one of those one of those first meta horror films, and I adore the movie because it's just such a perfect little whodunit combined with a slasher, combined with meta elements, and like these characters understand horror movies and how horror movies work, and for that, I think it's a really, it's still to this day a very interesting little movie. I have since seen all the Scream movies. I don't know why I watched all of them. Just because I felt like it. And none of them even come close to that first movie.
The next film, which is a part of the honorable mentions, along with Funny Games and Scream, which is a film that I didn't include because I haven't seen yet, but Cabin in the Woods feels like a bit of a placeholder for it because it kind of... it didn't do it first, obviously, but it does a similar thing in that it breaks down the tropes along the lines of Funny Games, but does it funnily... does it in a humorous manner. So it blends the genres, which is a lot more common nowadays, but also completely breaks down the formula too. And I deeply enjoyed it, and feels similar to Funny Games in a way, but it's very different in the way it goes about it. Like that, it kind of... it is a take on the bloodthirst of horror audiences. Does it in an entertaining and funny way. The last film I'd like to discuss is Jordan Peele's Get Out, 2017. He takes real-world social dynamics and social issues and puts them into a horror film in a way that is completely unique and palatable for audiences. It makes the situations he's trying to make commentary on understandable for us, and also outlines how and why they can be so horrifying. And I think, being as though it only came out less than a decade ago, it's conceivable that this will take hold in the minds of directors who are growing up watching his films. So I think, we're probably only years away from seeing directors who are deeply inspired by Jordan Peele, which is quite interesting. And I think the importance of this film is going to be seen later on through the directors that he's inspired, because it's such an effective technique. It's really unique, and I think it's going to, because of how well it's done, I think we're going to see a lot of people give their perspectives on, social issues the same way that Jordan Peele has through horror. I wanted to thank Ethan for joining me on this episode, and also you for joining us through listening. This has been a really fun episode. I encourage you all to check out Ethan's channel, which is going to be in the pinned comment down below, and you can also click on his name in the title of this video. But I hope you enjoyed, and I want to know what movies you think are as important, and whether you agree with the list and any additional reasons why as well. You've been great, and we will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.
Catch you on the Flippity Flip. Catch you guys on the Flippity Flip. Flip. Flippity flip. Really? Okay. See you guys.